This is Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, with Whitney and Jenkins. Hello and welcome to the 82nd episode of Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, where I bring on guests and we talk about the inner authentic voice and the challenges and the rewards that come from following it. This week I have with me Carolina Gutierrez. As a medium that has been hearing her spirit since the age of 4, Carolina believes in living a grounded life that is led by spirit. She guides clients and business owners alike on the importance of intuition first, challenging you to think about work and life from the inside out. She is passionate about the mental wellness that comes from a spiritual life. Her bare ability to speak to the energy of spirit, business, and feelings, she taps into the heart of people who are searching for meaning and purpose in their lives. Carolina intuitively weaves practicality with purpose and mission while encouraging her clients to do the same. Carolina's perspectives as a Latin woman in business have been seen across podcasts, virtual stages, and in-person events. As a curandera counselor and psychic medium, she helps people with their intuition so that the clearest voice they hear is the one from within. I had a wonderful time speaking with Carolina. She shared her story very vulnerably about how she discovered her gifts and how she dealt with applying them to her life. And I think that Carolina has a lot of wisdom for all of us. So here she is. Enjoy.
Oh my God, everything's happening. Okay, good. It happens early. Cuts down your editing. Okay. My allergies are a mess, so I'm gonna be a little bit sniffly. I apologize.
That's okay. So Carolina, this podcast is about following your inner voice and your authenticity and your intuition, or whatever you would like to call that. And so one of the first things that I like to ask my guests is to dive in deep, like really quickly. Is there a time that you remember recognizing this voice within you and your ability to follow it?
Yeah, actually, it's I'm finding out as I do more of these interviews that it's a little bit different for me than most. The very first time that I heard it, I was 4 years old, and it was a very clear. It was something that felt almost external for a moment, just because of how um, different it showed up than anything else. Um, I don't know how aware I was of an internal dialogue, but I must have been aware because this was different than that. And when I look back at the instance where it showed up, it's very telling of what the future held for me. I just wasn't ready to either recognize it or understand it at the time. But I was 4. I was watching some show that was talking about energy work. It was therapeutic touch. It was like hovering your hands over somebody, and my eyes were like wide. I was like, oh my God, this is so interesting. We had a little red television set. My mom was in the other room, and I remember watching it, and there was a plant right nearby, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. And I started like covering my hand, and then eventually the show stopped, and it was like, don't do this on your own. You need to be trained. This isn't for everyone. All the fear that kind of pops in. And I remember kind of going like, oh, okay, I can't do this. And the voice was like, don't stop, keep going, try it, continue, do this, do it. And I was I remember stopping and almost like looking around, and I'm like, where is that coming from? Because that's interesting, right? And as the years progressed, it kind of melded into my internal dialogue. And I didn't make sense of it until I was in my early 20s and really recognized it as my guides stepping in. So that was very interesting to remember back when I started to make sense of it. They were like, remember back when this happened? And I'm like, oh yeah. And they're like, that was us. That was, we were kind of trying to get you really stepping forward into what would be eventually your path, and how much that would play a role as to what you were being exposed to for the first time on that show. So
Wow.
it was very interesting. Yeah.
How did you integrate that experience as a 4-year-old? And
I didn't.
yeah.
I absolutely didn't, right? It happened and I just went about life. And, um, it wasn't until later that I learned not everybody has this internal voice, at least not in the way that it shows up for me. And it made sense of a lot of different kind of instances after 4 years old, where that was really kind of um, that guiding, that nudging, that GPS that was always
Mhm.
kind of showing up and being present. So I made much more sense of it later, right? But
Yeah.
up until I was in my early 20s and I figured out that I was a medium and that not everybody had these experiences, I couldn't. I knew it led me to good places and I knew that life was better because of it, but I really didn't understand it.
Mm. In your upbringing, was this like a topic that you were able to discuss or,
Absolutely not.
yeah.
No, not at all. I culturally, I come from an upbringing where this is recognized, right? Like, it's, but I wasn't in a family that encouraged it. So
Mhm.
it was like, I remember the odd thing is I remember when I was in the fourth grade, so I'd have been about 10. And it was one of the first times I was kind of going out alone, right? This was the 90s. So it was, a little bit different. And I was going to meet my mom at her work after school, or I think I didn't have school that day. So she's like, come and we'll walk home. And I remember being really nervous the night before, like just, I could feel the anxiety pumping. And I remember turning to her and saying, I'm really nervous about tomorrow and I don't know why. My mom was like, then don't go. Let's not do this. Right. So as much as the idea of being a medium never came up or the encouragement of that, the listening to your gut was very important. I was raised, it's like if something doesn't feel right, you know, uh, in many cases, don't do it. Don't
Yeah.
run that in that direction. Your body's telling you something.
Right. Wow. Yeah, that's really incredible that your mom supported you in that, and encouraged you to listen to that feeling.
I'm very grateful for that, definitely.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you didn't quite like integrate this into your life or have an understanding of it until you were in your 20s. Along the way, was there ever a point where you felt like you wanted to ignore it and it was causing you problems in your life?
Yes. So, I think a lot of people don't talk about when you start to embrace your gifts, and especially as a medium, when you really understand what it is. Because for me it was another medium that told me I was a medium in a non-medium setting. Can I say medium any more times? Um, so it was unrelated, right? Like she was in a workshop that I was in, and we were all out to lunch, and everybody was getting mini readings. And she said, honey, you're more intuitive than I am. You have to listen to this. This is, you have to start paying attention because this is tied to your purpose. And like, you could have knocked me over with a feather when she said that. And I was like, what? And I remember coming home and kind of sitting in a bit of shock, and the voices kicked in again, right? And they're like, great, now you understand what this is. Let's get to work. And so when that really opened up, because it was always there, but like there's a difference between what I call in my work now, when I work with people on intuition development, there's a difference between passive intuition and actively engaging in it, in my opinion, right?
Mhm.
It's kind of the difference of, think about a mother with their child walking around in a busy market, and that child is running and wanting to touch everything and grab everything, and the mother's like, no, sweetie, we don't run with scissors, be careful. Like there's always that guidance that steps in, but usually it's in the act of something, right?
Mhm.
So you're
Yeah.
out, actively engaging without the wisdom of what's about to come up, right? Versus think about a political leader or a leader, period, and their group of advisors that they sit with and meet at the beginning of their day. And they're like, we know that this is coming up and you need to be careful about this and you have this appointment and, you know, mold the analogy however you want, but you are actively seeking the advice even before you feel that you might need it for a specific thing. And so it's a very different approach.
Mhm.
And so I was passive until that moment. And then when it really became an active experience, it was a little overwhelming, to be honest with you. Um, I remember the first 6 months, it was like it was difficult for me to be outside. I remember going to a bookstore, and it was in a mall, and I was going up the escalator, and it was a very, very fancy mall. I just happened to be in the area, and it was, very, very high end, and this lovely looking mother and daughter were on the escalator in front of me, and I had to move away, like, I actually stepped back because all I could see was the mother being absolutely, you know, she was being hit by her husband, right?
Mm.
And so that image, that abuse was just like, I was like, "Oh my god," you know, and so it was difficult for sure. And, you know, I've openly spoken about my difficulty with addiction when it first started, because it was the only thing that shut it off, right? Like, it had
Mhm.
been on my whole life, but now it was on in a different way. It was like I could never turn the radio off, and
Wow.
I had no idea how. And so for me, it was pot that absolutely helped me. And you know, I'm past my 17 years of being clean, but
Mm.
um, I just remember knowing that if I was going to work with this in a healthy way, for me, no judgment to others. Everybody does what you guys do you and I do me type of thing.
Yeah.
But there was an innate feeling that if I was going to do this in a healthy way, and if I was going to do this the way that my purpose required me to do it, that couldn't be part of the game, right? Because
Right.
you know, it became really, really like it was a big problem, right? Like I would wake up with a joint in my hand, I would fall asleep with one, I couldn't go to the grocery store, you know, on, just as addiction shows up in people's lives. Um, like I remember there was there used to be something called the learning annex. And I remember there was different you know, like different workshops and like an hour about this or an hour about that. And I remember showing up to a medical intuitive workshop, not because
Mm.
I wanted to become a medical intuitive, but when she opened up, she was talking about her book and everybody was like, "Ooh, you know, it was nice actually. She was great." But, you know, I put up my hand at the back of the room. I'm like, "Okay, that's great. How do I turn it off?" And the
Mhm.
and the whole room was like, you know, like everybody there was an audible gasp. I was like, "Why? Why would you want to do that?" I'm like, "Yeah, because it's a lot."
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I yeah, that does sound like a lot. So, would it be sort of like a situation where you would just be going about your day-to-day life and this information would hit you and
It
come
still
to you?
is.
Yeah.
That still is, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So, how does the information come to you? Is it more of a feeling or like voices that you hear or um
It's a combination. So I think as you develop your gifts, whether you're a medium or not, right? I think we all have these gifts to be developed. Some are just more tied into like doing it for the public or doing it as a living, but they all start to kind of come online, right? Like at first, mine has always been voices, right? And when I was studying in school, because I was in a social work program, like I remember reading about it, I'm like, oh my God, am I schizophrenic? Right. And then I'm like, yeah, well, it doesn't, then I read more and I'm like, it doesn't show up at 4. And like there's different things about it. But maybe many people that are diagnosed, it could be looked at that, right?
mhm,
Um, or sorry, that have these gifts might be diagnosed that
right.
way.
Yeah.
But for me, it depends on where it is. Sometimes it's a voice that whispers the warning or the news or whatever advice is being given at the time, because it's not always bad, right? Um, Sometimes it's a flash. So uh, I see in my head. Actually, I'm starting to see outside. I've been fighting that one for 20 years, but I'm losing the fight. Um,
Mm.
uh, Sometimes it's a feeling. So I am uh, empathic. So like, I'll be like, why is my arm hurt? Like, and I'm very vocal about it. I'm not somebody. I've now started to bring my internal process out, and I'll be at home and I'm like, oh, my arm's hurting for no reason, right? And then my husband might come home half an hour and he's like, oh, I hit my arm getting into the car. And I was like, oh, okay. So yeah, so it's a variety of different ways. Smell as well. Smell for me actually is happens before I work with somebody a lot. So the night
Mm.
before, I'll be like, oh, I smell whiskey, and I don't drink. I just like very rarely. So I'm like, it's not like whiskey spilled in the house or anything like that. And I'm like, that's weird, and then I'll have a reading the next day where the person's father that passed might have been an alcoholic or might have been an undiagnosed alcoholic and just enjoyed a lot of drinks. So I'm like, oh, this is what I was smelling last night. So yeah, there's, and sometimes you just know, and it's a feeling that you can't shake. And it's almost becomes like an obsessive thought until
Yeah.
you know, give it the attention that it needs, recognizes it, and you're able to kind of go on from there.
Yeah. At one point, were you able to accept this about yourself and learn how to protect your energy?
That's an interesting story. I don't know if we have that long on our interview, but needless to say that it hasn't been a linear road to acceptance, right? Once I kicked the pot, sure, it became easier, but I think that a lot of people don't realize that just because I have these gifts, they don't always apply to me per se. Sorry, you're gonna hear my dogs pitter pattering in the back. So I might be able to read for clients, great, right? And I'm like, oh, be careful, this is coming up, or this might be something that you want to be aware of. But I might have a little bit more insight because I speak with my guides and my ancestors a lot, but I'm still in the same learning and semi-blind state as the rest of the world is in regards to this. So I myself need help as well, right? Um, but this is all going on and life is going on as well, right? I have to pay a mortgage, I have to do
Yeah.
laundry, I have to adult, right? And so there was a period of time in my life where things got really hard. I was going through some difficulties personally. And I was like, I do not have the bandwidth for this. Right. And I absolutely tried to turn my back, and let's just say, that like overly used line from The Godfather. They dragged me back in because they're like, you don't have a choice. Like this, just you can't just turn this switch off. You can't just say that this isn't what I'm going to do anymore. Because, as much as I think that we manifest and we're able to create certain things in our lives through, actionable thoughts and processes and, activities, I think that we also have that's married with fate, right? And
Mhm.
so I think both absolutely dance this dance. And so our manifestation ability stops where it bumps up against our purpose. And so for me, I was trying to manifest a life away from this, and they're like, no, it doesn't work that way. And so I would say for me, the last even though I've been practicing publicly for about 20 years, 10 years, I was fine. I stepped away for a bit, but probably the last 5 years have absolutely been just kind of like, there's no running, right? Like this is it. So let's make the best of it.
It kind of reminds me of the term the daemon or the diamond of this like thing that's inside of you that you can't ignore.
Absolutely.
And if you don't, if you ignore it, like it'll
So
ruin
the
you.
daimon, right? Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of like what I feel like is connected to the inner voice of following that thing that you can't ignore. And your story is very very illustrative of that, I think. So how have you accepted this and used it, and how do you currently navigate your life with these gifts?
So I think the reality of it is that I just have to accept what is, right? Whether good, bad, pretty, ugly, it just is, right? It's kind of like the way that you have to accept that you are the height that you are, and you can wear heels all you want to pretend that you aren't that height, but at the end of the day, when you get in bed, you are the height that you are,
Right.
right? And so for me, definitely that's been one, it's been that. Two, it's been um understanding that everything that I want in life, whether it's personally or professionally, I have to feel the fear and run through this alongside it in order to get to that. Because
Mm,
all the avoiding, all the trying to go around it, under it, over it, but not through it is where all the difficulties, the fear, the uncertainty comes from, right? Because the breadcrumbs are always leading me in that path. And I just have to remember, I can give this advice to other people. Yeah, no problem, right? When I read other people or I'm working with them in a healing capacity, it's like reading a book. I'm like, yeah, here we go. Here it is. And then when I turn it to me, I have the same fears and, difficulties that we all have. So one is just, I think for me, turning 40 was a big shift in that realization. There's a reason why so many spiritual traditions um, require you to be 40 to do a lot of things, or for them to recognize that certain wisdom kicks in. And I didn't really understand that before. I thought it was just a load of BS until I turned 40. I'm like, oh, okay, the training wheels are off. There's something different about how my energy's showing up, how much I'm starting not to care about what other people think, and
mhm.
just really accepting who it is that I am and recognizing that regardless of societal expectations or even the expectations that I had of myself, right? So one, it's definitely been that. I think also the fact that I have daily practice. And so this isn't just how I show up for other people, this is how I show up for myself. And that daily practice for me has been absolutely crucial. The other component is really tying into my ancestry and recognizing
Mhm.
that I need to know where I came from in order to know who I am and how I show up in order to move forward. And so for the first 11 years of my practice, where I worked with the public, ancestors, yeah, you kind of knew them as a name, but I didn't really recognize the impact spiritually that had. And for the last 11 years, I've been practicing in a fashion where they're at play. And that's been an enormous game changer for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, my practice is I'm a curandera, which is a tradition that comes from Latin America. And the root of that word is curar, which means to heal. And so it's a particular type of healer that is common throughout the region. Depending on where you come from, they have a different flavor. But if you were to say curandera to somebody that understands the culture, they're like, oh, yeah, we know what that is. And really, you're a spirit intermediary because the belief is that all disharmony in your life, whether it's health related, mental health related, emotional, it all starts in the spiritual realm and then it's
Yeah.
transferred over. And so, just as much as you would go to a doctor to address the physical components of that issue, you would see a curandera for the spiritual components of that issue. And that
Yeah.
was, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that was something that for years I tried to kind of fit into the spiritual community, but it wasn't until I brought my ancestors and the grounding in that that made sense. They're like, "This is what you are, and this is what you have to call yourself." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So there's always learning to do in this, right? There's always those
Yeah.
different awakenings
I
throughout this process.
I feel like there's so many directions that I kind of want to go, but I have to just pick one. So, would you mind, like, you don't have to share this if you don't feel comfortable, but you mentioned that you overcame an addiction.
Yeah,
And would you mind sharing how you were able to do that? Because
absolutely.
yeah, I feel like sometimes like that is connected to like spirituality or a higher purpose or source. And since you were already in those realms, that's kind of interesting to me.
So the way that I overcame it was using ancestral wisdom that I didn't understand I was using at the time, which is very interesting. So somebody shared with me, they're like, listen, because I tried to quit pot easy 7 times, like easy, right? And sometimes I'd go 2 months and I'd be like, oh, great, I've got this. And then I'd be like, oh, but it's a Sunday afternoon, so I'm not working for a couple days. I'm like, I can enjoy it. And within a day, I was like right back to like the enormous amount that I was smoking. And so somebody says to me, they're like, you have to address it with the spirit of the plant
Mhm.
because you have dishonored the spirit of the plant through the way that you've been using it because it was not meant to be used in that recreational way. It was a sacred and holy use, and you have to make amends with the plant because each plant for misuse of however it is that it's meant to be used, there's a cost involved. Just like there's always some type of exchange, right? In I think in everywhere, spiritual or non-spiritual. And so this plant, marijuana, the way that it I guess you could say punish me or the cost, actually that's a better word. The cost of the misuse was it would take a bit of my free will every
Mm.
time. And so I didn't want to do anything, right? And I'm a highly creative person, highly active person, and I just didn't want to do anything. And no matter how much I tried, being somebody that I think I had very strong willpower, this was something stronger than me. And so they're like, make amends with the plant, right? Make amends with the spirit of marijuana, and ask for your will back. Right. And so it was a little ritual that I did in regards to finding out what it was that the plant needed from me in order to make amends. There was a couple of things that I had to do there. Everybody's different. I've helped clients through this. So I can tell you what mine was, but not everybody's is like this. For me, it was I had to swear off it. I just was not a person that could use it ever again unless it was in a spiritual setting, in ceremony, and that I had to be very cautious as to who I chose to work with if I ever did went down that road. Um, and it required me to ground. I was very ungrounded at the time. So they're like, for the next 2 weeks, every day, you have to go and you have to walk in barefoot in grass for half an hour
Mm.
every day. Luckily, it was the summer, so I was like, okay, no problem, because I live in Canada. Um, and it was easier than it had ever been to stop. Did I have to use willpower? Did I have to focus? Did I have, like, was it uncomfortable? Absolutely. I'm not going to say it, but there was just not the amount of enormous resistance that I had had before. It took me about 4.5 months to regulate my sleep. I wasn't sleeping during that time because I wasn't dreaming because I had been smoking so much pot, right? I wasn't falling asleep. So like I can go through like the whole list of
Mhm.
detox, but if you know, you know, right? Um, but it's really one of the first steps towards the shamanic way that I practice now that introduced me to like, whoa, wait, hold on. This is no, we don't talk about this a lot, right? Of like
Mhm.
the actual power that plants have in our life. And now they make up a huge part of my practice. I do a lot of ritual bathing. I make herbal baths for my clients. Nothing internal, just because I don't have that training, but I think eventually I might go down that path. But yeah, definitely the plant allies have made this journey very interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I feel like many people use that to access like a different part of themselves, and you were using it to numb that. So it's
It was the only
fascinating.
thing that would shut it off. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like after that point, when did you like start accepting that you are a healer and you were going to start working with clients and
I
bringing.
accepted that very early on. So I was the interesting part of the story is I thought my healing abilities were my gift. And I thought the intuition was just kind of extra.
Okay.
People that know me laugh at that now because it's really it's the intuition that really now leads. But that was very early on. Like I've been practicing publicly now 20 years. So I had the reason that I met that medium at the course that I was in was I was taking a hypnotherapy course, and Reiki, and kind of a very common starter pack in this spiritual space. And it was the only thing. I was in a really bad marriage at the time. I was very depressed. Um, and it was the only thing that made me excited. And I was
Mm,
like, why am I feeling so good? But like, because I was not feeling good.
mm,
And it was like, this is what I want to do. And I remember that same medium that said, you got to listen to your gifts. They're like, this is your path. Right. And I remember it was a very odd feeling because the room filled up. It was like there was standing room only in the space, even though it was just us at lunch in a semi-empty restaurant. But I was like, it feels crowded. I don't know why it feels so crowded. So the signs were there, but life circumstances sometimes make you lose your faith a bit, right? And I definitely went through a period like that. I, it was the start of a 10-year infertility battle
mm,
that just, like I don't wish that on my worst enemy because that just wipes every part of your hope and like the idea of the life that you thought you were going to have. And so it really didn't allow me to be able to show up for people in the way that I had been showing up for them. And I was like, okay, I'm going to focus on me. I'm going to go out, I started a technology business.
mm,
I had employees. My little business was growing, and it was during just before COVID um, that the cracks started to show in that. And And I remember negotiating with my guides because I'm still hearing them, right? Like my technology business is going
mm.
along, and I walk into somebody's space that we're like doing something, maybe it's technology coaching or setting up a system. And I walk into their office and I'm like, oh my God, this guy had a massive fight with his wife last night and they're on the verge of divorce. This man's not listening to a word that I'm saying about
Yeah.
automating your processes, right? So that healer, that therapist never went away, right? And my guides were not very kind to me during that time for valid reasons, right? They're like, this isn't what you're supposed to be doing, right? And so there was a harshness, and I think a lot of people, if there's one thing that I'd love to share is that there's a lot of people that talk about how wonderful your guides are and how they love you and all that. That's true. But your guide's sole job is to get you to fulfill the purpose that you came here to fulfill, period. And if it means that they have to kick you a little bit, and if it means that they have to get a little bit nasty, and if it means that they guide you into situations where you're like, how did I end up here? But it's because you had to learn something, they will do that, right? And so we were not on good terms back then, let me put it that way. And my husband had gotten a reading for something, and I said, "Oh, I'm going to sit in on this. Let me see." And I got a bit of the reading, and my life really changed again, right? That was another awakening, because they're like, if you think your life is challenging now, you keep doing what you're doing, because we will take every single thing that you have away, and we will put you on the street, because this isn't what you're meant to do. And I was kind of like, and I remember negotiating them. And I knew when I was negotiating that I'm like, it was a lost cause, but I did it anyway. And I'm like, listen, I'll do it on weekends. Let me just keep my employees and my retainer clients and the stability that that's sort of brought me. And I'm like, I'll do it on weekends. I promise, evenings and weekends. And they said yes, of course, knowing that that wasn't the only thing that was going to happen. And, that kind of cracked that cocoon that I had built for myself. Because think about it, how far away could I have been from my healing work than to create a cold and callous technology business and I was always like, oh, I'm helping people's lives, like I'm helping people automate and spend more time with their family. And really, I was just running, right? Um, and so And so as soon as that cracked open, within the first week, I lost 3 retainer clients. Within the first 3 months, I had to let half of my contractors go. And, by the year's end, everything that I had spent building and the energy and effort had, people are like, oh, I'm retiring, or my daughter's gonna be, and it just came crashing down. And they're like, and I was like, you lied to me. And they're like, yes, now keep doing what you need to do and not this.
Yeah. Mhm. So if people would like to work with you now, what what can you offer them?
So I call what I do culturally informed mental health support. So I am a trained counselor, registered with the social work college here in Ontario. So half of my work is counseling covered by insurance, right? But it does come from a culturally informed lens. The other half of my work is where the real fun is, right? And that's where healing, clearing, a lot of clearing work, um, you can't properly heal if you haven't cleared, right? And we don't realize how much of a crowded planet we live on. And so the importance of clearing work has become, I would say it's at least 50% of what I do. I also offer readings. I am a consulting medium for a Ifa Yoruba uh, cultural organization here in Canada. Um, I have worked with different universities and museums in regards with my reading. Um, but it pretty much it's again it's that spirit intermediary, right? My gifts allow me to see certain things and certain connections that people might have been missing in all the work they've done over the years. And so sometimes it can be that missing piece, that missing awareness that I'm sometimes able to bring in. I always say sometimes, because spirit has a fascinating way of not letting me get too cocky, because it slaps me back into, oh, really? You think you can do that? You should always ask us, type of thing. And so I'm always kind of putting that gauge there. So because you never know, right? Um, but yeah, so it could be I'm working right now. I just launched a program in regards to working with your ancestors. And really, that is a first step in recognizing them towards ancestral healing, because I think a lot of us don't recognize how much that actually plays a role. And it comes up in my reading so much. Um, yeah, I'm a unicorn of an entrepreneur, so I love entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And so we have a ritual room spray line that I make with my husband, who is he practices a type of Arabic astrology, and so we've mixed his timing with my plants to make a love story. Those are wonderful. I love them. They're like liquid talismans is almost a way of looking at it. Because when you combine astrology with plants, You're distilling at the appropriate time and you're picking raw material that has been grown for ritual purpose. So you get the highest essence of the plant. And it was because I was doing shows and going to places where I couldn't burn anything, and well, not pot, but I couldn't burn any of the other herbs that I wanted to burn, to be able to shift the energy and to work kind of with what was there. And so I'm like, okay, I need something that's a bit more user friendly. And so we created that. But yeah, I have a whole line of products in my Botanica. When it comes to baths and different cleanses, different incenses. Yeah, so I'm the creativity in me never stops. Plus,
Yeah.
combined with ADHD, that doesn't help either. So,
So, just curious, what are your astrological signs?
so I am a triple Pisces, if you couldn't tell. Yeah. So yeah, it's always interesting for sure.
Yeah. How do you feel? Are you able to pick up on like collective information as far as like,
I, I sometimes get it, but that's really not my specialty. So my specialty is um, people that have been searching for a long time for answers, and that doesn't happen. I'm able to sometimes, again, I have to put that there, kind of bore in a bit and be like, oh, these are the missing connections for people. And so a lot of times I get referrals from other practitioners where they're like, we've been trying. This is the fifth, I'm the fifth person she comes to. We still haven't been able to figure out. I'm sending them your way. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. So um my my beautiful reading guides, the trio of reading guides that I carry, they're very good at that.
you're making me want to book a reading with you?
Do it, let's do it, sure. Well, and for everybody wondering and kind of being on the fence of that,
Yeah.
um, I offer a free 10-minute consultation. I don't read during that consultation, but I'm of the mindset that I'm not meant to work with everybody, and everybody's not meant to work with whatever practitioner. And so um, I highly encourage people to kind of book that, see if it feels like it's a right fit. If I remind you of that creepy aunt that you had that made your life impossible, probably not. We shouldn't be working together. Um, and I think the other reality that a lot of people don't talk about is every medium can't read everybody, right? A lot of them, there's very few that I have met that are willing to admit that, but
Mm.
that is absolutely true. So I encourage that meeting too, for me to be like, for my guides to be like, yay or nay, right?
Right. And you also offer so many different uh, processes and modalities that it might be like a good consultation to be sort of be like, this would be best for you. So,
Yeah. I'm actually I'm in the process for the next few months. I'm kind of rejigging my marketing and my messaging. And I'm kind of thinking of removing all of those options and kind of being like, we'll see what you need when you come,
yeah.
right? Kind of remove all that noise and that all those that decision fatigue that we have to go through as adults, and if you're a business owner, even more, right? So so yeah, because it's interesting. I have regular clients where they're like, I'm gonna book a reading, and I'm like, sure. And as I'm prepping, like that morning, I'm like, oh, this isn't gonna, like, I can feel right away. I'm like, the energies that are coming forward, this is a healing, right? Because I start to sweat. It's just this you can like see the vapors coming off of me in the winter. And I'll open the door if it's a regular, I'll open the door and they'll see like my hair will be wet. And they're like, oh, it's a healing today. I'm like, yeah, it looks like it. So yeah, so yeah, I highly encourage the 10-minute call.
Yeah, I think that would be incredible. I was looking at your website and I was like, I want to do all of these things, like, but where would I start? So, yeah.
I recommend usually, even if it is that you need a healing, I recommend just a basic reading to get started because it gives a pulse of kind of what's going on, as well as a roadmap of what it is that where you might want to go with this. I am not I'm not the one and done healer for everything. And so in that reading, it might be like you might benefit from a spiritual court reading with Carolina, but you should be focusing on working with a breath worker for the next 6 months doing that. I don't do breath work, right? So it is a very you leave with homework. Let me put it that way. You leave with homework. I had a call yesterday. It was funny. She was great because she had read my website, and a lot of people don't read kind of the FAQ, and I really go into make the best of your time with me this way. I'm very A-type in my other life, so I love to be able to um, spirit's so unpredictable. So if I can give you some predictability and some stability, I want to offer that. And she had clearly read my website, and she has okay. So at the end, I'm like, okay, do you have any questions? And she goes, yeah, I have 2 questions. Number one, she said it, and I answered it, and then she's like, and I was like, what's wrong? And she goes, I'm taken aback by your answer. And I was like, okay. And she goes, so much so that I forgot my second question. And I was like, that's what happens in readings. So you have to write your questions down before you come so that that doesn't. She goes, I can't believe how I wasn't expecting the answer that you gave me, and it threw me for a loop. And now, and you could feel the energy shift in the call in a good way. But it was kind of like, I'm like, that's exactly why you have to write the questions down because um, just like me, I try my best to go into every reading absolutely zero expectations. I'm like, this could be a fail for me. And it was, I share this for all those up and coming readers, not because I'm a pro, but because I want you to understand that this is common. It was until about a year ago. So I'm opening the kimono here, guys. It was up until a year ago that I would sit in front of somebody and I would be like, is this the reading that shows me to be a fraud?
Mm.
Is this the reading where I crash and burn and there's nothing that I can offer? And I'm going to get a horrendous Google review and, like all that thing. And so I'm shifting finally out of that energy. But for 19 years, I held that same energy. Right. And people, I remember sharing it with very few clients, and they're like, but why? Clearly. And I'm like, I know, but that,
Oh,
societal pressure doesn't go away, right? The reality that this is a
yeah.
little bit fringe, right?
I think also like that just kind of shows like the reverence that you have for it and like, that you care about how people experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you. That was the twist I needed on that, Mindy.
So speaking of like upcoming people who might be interested in tapping into their like intuitive abilities, do you coach people on those things?
I do. So currently, my intuition level 1 and 2 is only in person, but that will be changing in the new year. I'm bringing that online. Um, I also do one-on-one coaching. I specialize in older, undeveloped mediums that have kind of run from this and feel victimized by this. And they're kind of like, I need it to stop. And I'm like, honey, here, let me hold your hand. It's not going to stop, right? So this is the way that we start to get used to that. But yeah, pretty much, I work with mediums that currently read. I work with mediums that just kind of live with their gifts and don't use it with the public. But yeah, definitely, I encourage for those actually, I encourage my spiritual court reading because my spiritual court reading is all about reading the spirits that walk with you and you
Mm,
having a better understanding of how to work with those spirits. My work for me, on top of the reverence that I have for my work, I really believe in fostering spiritual independence in people because
mm,
I have seen so many, and I have been victim of it too, of the abuse and the absolute I don't even know what the right word would be to say the absolute um corruption of this work and the damage, the absolute deep-seated damage that that does to people. And so if there's anything that I can say to people out there right now is if anybody makes you reliant on them, run.
Mhm.
That's not, and I say that, listen, come to me. I love my clients, but I don't think it's healthy that you see somebody or that they're the only person that you get an answer from, right? If these people are genuinely looking out for your best interest, they should be offering things that help you develop this on your own as well, right? Um, I'm a medium. I go see a medium. I go see a diviner when things get challenging for me, right? So I absolutely walk this talk, but I also recognize that there's an unhealthy side to it. And just like everything, we got to kind of learn to walk that line between that. And so um let's see, what can I tell you to develop your intuition right now? One of the first things that I say to people is you have to do your work. You have to do your work in recognizing your shadow. And what does that mean? You got to do therapy. Even if it's just a year. I'm not saying you got to be in therapy for like 5, 10 years. But if you don't do that work before you start to embrace this beautiful other world, you're going to go into that world completely ungrounded.
Mhm.
And that's unsafe. That leads to bigger problems. And that can lead to mental health issues as well, right? Because you almost live in this semi delusion without recognizing that, hey, we live in this 3D world. The ego is never going to go away. That's part and parcel of the game. So I can't shut my ego down. So I'm like, okay, buddy, I know who you are. You're going to just stay right here. We might not listen to you, but you're going to stay right here because I can never go to, get rid of it. And if somebody thinks that they can, I'm not the person to I'm not to work with. As I'll be like, okay, Jesus, thanks. And you have to work at this. You have to work at this. You don't take a weekend course and then boom, here we go. We're ready to go. Right.
Yeah, it's a lifelong journey for sure.
Yeah.
And
No drive through spirituality here.
and if you ignore it, it will make itself known for sure. That's happened to me. I've ignored some things and have landed in the hospital. So I know that path. So is there anything that you feel like you would love to share that's on the top of your mind or your heart as we are wrapping up the conversation?
Don't forget your ancestors. I forgot them for 10 years. And the difference that they made in my practice was shocking when I included them in. We all have them. You didn't just materialize on this planet. You are the product of the love and maybe not so much love of thousands of people that you carry here walking along with you. And so if there's anything that you want to do to really supercharge your spiritual practice, whether it's your intuition or just connecting with spirit, start looking into your ancestors.
Excellent. So I will put all of your links into the show notes so people can click on them easily to find you and book a reading or the menu of options that you have available.
Awesome. Thank
Um,
you.
And I wrap the show up with this one last question, and I feel it might be a bridge to what you just said, but if your inner voice had a billboard, what would it say to the world?
It's dare to lead with your intuition because your life will change.
Yeah, that says it all. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom.
This was fun. I feel like I talked a lot and you didn't talk enough.
No, no, this is for you and sharing your story. So I think that's good.
Awesome. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Thank you so much for joining me this week. If you're listening and you like what you hear, please consider subscribing and rating this podcast, as it really helps get this podcast out to other people who might be interested in hearing it but don't know about it yet. And also, if you'd like to contact me or reach me, you can reach me at unconditioningpodcast@gmail.com or unconditioningpodcast on Instagram. Thank you so much. And until next time, stay tuned in to you.